Hello, you silly geese. It is I, Lily, and today I will be telling you about my Mana Stacking Thorns Infernalist Shield Charge build. That's a hell of a mouthful, but that's also what you're here for. It's coming up to the Path of Exile to 0.3, the third Edict launch, and we are all looking forward to playing the league, but do you know what your league's starting yet? I think I do. I've got a few concept builds that I've been looking at, but this is definitely the one that has been exciting me the most by a long shot. But before I get into it, in case you haven't seen any videos by Kulturak or myself or stuff on Reddit saying this is how Thorns works, Thorns is a stat that you can get on a few pieces of gear or from some support gems or from a few other sources that makes it so that when things hit you, they take damage as well. You still take damage, but they take damage on top of that. On top of that, we have managed to make entire builds that fully work around the concept of this Thorns damage happen using the support gems Core Burst and Barbs. Now, both of these things let melee attacks deal your Thorns damage on a hit for the next 3 or 4 hits. One of them's 3 hits, one of them's 4 hits. In the new patch, one of them is going to be 6 hits, which is pretty cool. One of them, Barbs, specifically only works on melee strike skills, whereas Quill Burst will work on any melee attack. So when you have these support gems and an ability, usually Rapid Assault on the spear, every time you attack, if you've been hit recently, you will deal this Thorns damage. So this is quite a good offensive build. It does require you to be hit, so it also requires you to be playing quite a tanky character, so it makes for a good all-rounder build. Now previously this build was most often played, as I've explained, with a fast strike skill and Quill Burst and Barbs, and that is still going to be a viable playstyle in 0.3. I'll be making a video about my league starter choices for that classic Thorns build next. But today we're talking about something very different. Today we are mana stacking with shield charge on the Infernalist. Now the first thing one might be asking is, why shield charge? Shield charge isn't a strike. Well, boy do I have some screenshots for you as soon as I manage to find them and get them open. In patch 0.3, shield charge is getting a buff. Now, you see in front of you a big wall of text. I see that in front of me as well. But fortunately, I've highlighted some important words in pink. Shield charge no longer has a cooldown. This means that you can permanently spam it out. It's also a movement ability. It is going to be a little bit slower this patch, but we can just constantly be moving through the map with shield charge, and it is a melee attack, so it can trigger Quill Burst. It is, however, not a strike, so we can't use Barbs. That kind of sucks. That means we only have one support gem for our Thorns damage, and that is Core Burst, and Core Burst only does for your next 3 hits after you retaliate with Thorns. It's a bit mid, especially considering Barbs is probably getting buffed in the next patch, whereas Core Burst is probably not, but we can deal with that because we get to use something interesting and new. When I say new, it's been in the game for a while, but there hasn't really been a reasonable use for it up until now, and that is Crackling Barrier. Crackling Barrier supports channeling skills only, and while channeling those skills, you gain Lightning Thorns based off of your maximum mana. Now, it should be obvious, but just in case, I did test, and Crackling Barrier does work with Shield Charge. It does make our Thorns damage go up, and it makes Shield Charge do more damage with Quill Burst. Now, I have here a list of every channeling skill in Path of Exile 2. All of the highlighted ones are attacks. This means that they can work with Quill Burst. Now, only one of these is a strike, and that is Perfect Strike. So it's the only channeling ability where you can use Crackling Barrier, Barbs, and Quill Burst. However, the actual strike part of Perfect Strike only occurs after you're done channeling, so it doesn't use the Crackling Barrier damage, and also Perfect Strike is just an extremely slow ability. It's like all the other things, it just doesn't really work. However, Shield Charge is a movement ability, so you are constantly moving while attacking, while channeling. You're doing the damage while you're channeling, meaning you get to use Crackling Barrier. You're also attacking, which means you get to use Quill Burst. The only thing you can't use with this is Barbs, but I think we'll be just fine. So assuming I haven't done a horrible explanation, you now understand why we're going with Shield Charge. The next question to answer is, why are we going with Infernalist? I looked at every Ascendancy in the game to try and think about what would work with this Mana Stacking Thorns, and I truly believe that no Ascendancy other than Infernalist can work. And this might sound weird because we are doing lightning damage. We are not even going to be using Avatar of Fire. We're just straight up doing lightning damage. But I realized something interesting, which is when you're not playing a spell build, Infernalist doesn't encourage you to do fire damage at all. Very weird fact right there. Anyway, the big thing about Infernalist that we love here is Bedat's Gaze. Bedat's Gaze reserves 25% of our life but gives us 1 maximum mana per 6 maximum life. This gives us a hell of a lot of mana and also allows us to stack life, making our build somewhat tanky. You can see here that on this kind of perfect build that I've simulated in Path of Building, that this node is giving us 737 total mana. That is 50 flat lightning thorns damage, which I hear you is not a whole lot. However, after increases and critical damage, it will actually work out to quite a bit of damage. That is at the very least the same amount of damage as 1 lightning thorns rune, the Greater Rune of Tithing, which was already considered the best in slot rune for thorns, even for physical thorns builds, because it is just the best source of thorns damage. This mana then also gets to serve as a sort of a health pool using Mind Over Matter, meaning that we're really not losing very much life by reserving 25% of our life pool. On top of that, Infernalist can be an extremely comfortable and tanky class separately through other methods. We have Altered Flesh over here, which gives us 20% of cold and lightning damage taken as fire damage, meaning we only truly have to focus on 1 resistance. You do still need some cold and lightning resistance, but we can get some extra maximum fire resistance, which will make our character a lot tankier, or make our character take less cold, lightning, and fire damage instead of just less fire damage. We also take 20% of physical damage as chaos damage, so this gets our Fizz Max hit away from being completely terrible. As you can see in this very late game build that I'm simulating in Path of Building, I have 12,000 physical max hit. I looked on PoE Ninja to see what other people's numbers were looking like. 12,000 physical max hit is a big fucking number. We then also get to reserve another quarter of our life to get 1 maximum energy shield per 8 maximum life, which works out to gaining more energy shield than we lose life because of the fact that you can get increased energy shield. We have 410% increased energy shield, and that is turning 898 life into 2,286 energy shield. I think we'll be just fine. The final tasty thing that Infernalist gives us is Grinning Immolation. This does make us become ignited, taking a fuck ton of damage every time we crit. However, we get a 50% additional critical damage bonus, which is pretty huge. We have a total critical damage bonus of 430% at this point in the build, and a hell of a lot of that is literally just coming from our Ascendancy. The Ignite might sound scary, but don't worry, the game has a convenient solution for that, and that is called a Dowsing Charm. Whenever it's off cooldown and we get ignited, no we're not, we're Ignite immune for the duration of that charm. Great, that's easy, and we've completely negated the downside of this Ascendancy point, and we can stack Dowsing Charms if we're worried about not having enough charges when it becomes crucial. Now, most Thorns build will be a Warbringer, which I think is a solid Thorns option, and I will be making a build guide similar to this one for Thorns Warbringer and also Thorns Tactician, which I think is an interesting sleeper option. But the benefits that Warbringer usually brings to a Thorns build just don't apply nearly as much to our build, where the most important stat we can get is mana, as it provides us with both defense and offense with the way that we're making this build work. The next important thing for you to understand if you're going to be considering playing this build is what uniques are absolutely required at a bare minimum to make this build work. If you do not have these uniques, this build will not work. And the first and most important of these is the Crown of the Pale King Cultist Crown. This is a part of why you can only play Thorns from Act 4, because every Thorns build will need this. It makes it so that Thorns can retaliate against all hits. Without this, Thorns only retaliates against melee attacks, which is not even half of the things you'll be getting hit with as you progress through the game, and there might even be entire zones and maps where you don't get hit with a melee attack at all. So Crown of the Pale King is totally non-negotiable. The next build enabling unique, and this is build enabling for our damage, is the Briar Patch. This gives us a plus 25% Thorns base critical hit chance. That is one of the highest base crit chances that any damage type can get, and it makes going crit with Thorns an absolute no-brainer. This means that you don't need nearly as much increased crit chance as most builds do to get to 100% crit chance, which means that you are, with the multiplier we have, doing 4.3 times as much damage. I do have other uniques in the build here, but they are completely optional and can be totally replaced with rare items without making any real damage to the build. You might just lose a little bit of damage or a little bit of survive compared to what I have figured out here are just helpful things to the build. So the next important thing to go over here is what is important on a rare item. Now, your first priority on any piece of rare equipment in any build ever in any Path of Exile game is resistance. You want to get to at least 75% of all of of your elemental resistances and I would say at least 60% chaos resistance before you start giving a fuck about anything else. You can also get to more than those numbers, and in our build it is quite important to get to 75% chaos resistance and 80% fire resistance, because without these stats the damage conversion of lightning, cold and physical damage will probably hurt us quite a bit. So getting your resistances up on your rare gear is really important. The next most important stat that we can get on any piece of rare gear is life. Life gives us energy shield, life gives us mana, life gives us life, and life gives us damage. So life is an all-round, just does everything good stat. Our next priority, which you can't see on the chess piece because chess pieces can't get it, is mana. Mana is like our secondary life. Mana acts as a health pool for us, and mana is a direct source of damage for us. It's also a prefix on gear. It is very important. Our next most important stat is going to be energy shield. Energy shield is the base defense that we are making use of. However, we are getting most of our energy shield from life and our other defense as well from mana. So energy shield does not come before life and mana, but if you need to fill that third prefix, energy shield increased or more is the way to go every single time. And to fill the last of the modifiers on our rare gear, when we get into that perfect endgame, we want intelligence or strength. This can also just be a good filler roll anywhere because it is quite likely to roll, and both of them give us mana. Strength also gives us life and energy shield, but also our abilities cost strength and intelligence to use. Now, I've previously found that with Thorns, you want a lot of uniques. This build is not quite as heavy as most Thorns builds usually are. One unique that I think can offer quite a lot for us is the Window to Paradise Tower Shield. It applies elemental exposure to enemies 3 meters in front of you while your shield is raised. Our shield is permanently raised, so in theory, this is permanent elemental exposure applied to our enemies with 0 effort put in to do that, and that is just a massive damage increase. Another unique that is very nice to us is Bearer's Anguish. It's a dowsing charm. Dowsing charms are important to mitigate our self-damage from our Ascendancy, and Bearer's Anguish is just a really cool, unique one. In the new patch, it won't work quite as well as what you see here. However, it does still scale its damage off of your maximum life, and it will just be a nice extra source of damage while we're using something that we were planning on using anyway. It's very much not necessary. I don't know how expensive it is going to be, and a blue dowsing charm will do all we need, but it's a fun option. 2 other uniques that I haven't slotted but are worth thinking about are the Midnight Braid and Alchemy Era. These are a wombo combo that gives us a massive defensive boost but might come at the cost of some offense. So firstly, Midnight Braid gives us 50% of damage taken recouped as mana. The biggest source of mana recoup that I could find on the tree was 20% of damage taken recouped as mana. So this is pretty huge. If we are struggling to recover our mana, which again is a health pool for us, Midnight Braid does a lot for that. So that's quite nice. It also combos quite well with the Alchemy Era Shield, which gives us damage blocked as recouped as mana. That means that when we are hit, we can recoup up to 70% of that damage as mana, and when we block a hit, we recoup 100% of that damage as mana. That means that if we get to a 30% block chance, hypothetically, we are kind of-ish recouping 100% of the damage we take. So that's kind of our optional uniques that we can use in our perfect endgame setup. One thing in our perfect endgame setup that was hard for me to work out is our jewels. The only thing I know for sure is that we definitely want maximum fire resistance, and we do scale from area of effect and obviously increase thorn damage. I could not find any other role that we can get on a jewel that really adds a lot of benefit to this build. There's no increases or additions to mana or life or energy shield or anything that we really scale off of, but this does fortunately mean that our jewels will probably be quite cheap. But anyway, now you've seen what the end game looks like, but you might be a little bit confused because I've called this a league start build. I just felt like explaining the endgame was important to get you to understand how the build works, but I will now get into how we're actually gonna league start this build and get playing it as soon as possible. Now, I've mostly covered this in the notes section of the build, as how the early game works I think is going to change quite a bit with the new patch, with all the changes to how things work overall, so I haven't really fleshed it out completely. If you get the pub from down in the description below, you will see that I have made some loadouts explaining your Act 1 to 3 and your Act 4, but they're very much not fleshed out. I'm rather just going to explain this using the words that are on the screen right now and the concepts that are in my brain. There might be some things that are in these words on screen that I forget to mention verbally, and there might be things in my brain that I've forgotten to put in these little notes in the path of building here, so I recommend reading and listening. Now, the beginning of leveling this build is gonna kinda suck because we actually can't play Thorns until Act 4 because the support gems we need are tier 3 support gems, which, assuming nothing changes, are only available at level 53. And we are also completely reliant on a unique item, which means we need access to the new trading system before we can get that, which will, according to GGG, only become available in Act 4. So we cannot play Thorns until Act 4. This means that we're stuck with the options that Witch already has for leveling that exist out there. Now, the best build guides I could find on the internet, and basically the only build guides I could find on the internet that walk you through the first 3 acts on a Witch, are all minion builds. I recommend trying to find your own minion build that you like the look of to do the first 3 acts with. I personally have copied and linked to the max roll minion army infernalist leveling guide. I have filled in their Act 1 gems in this build and their Act 1 passive tree progression, but I haven't fully fleshed that out to be Act 2 and Act 3 as well. I recommend taking a look at the max roll guide for how to level an infernalist. However, a lot may change in the patch, so you may have to thumbsuck some aspects of this leveling process. I do think that's the same as absolutely any other build guide that you're watching a video for or reading up on or whatever at this point. We don't know what the patch is going to look like. Things are going to have changed a lot when it comes out, so our Act 1 to 3 are going to be very much thumbsucked. I can't really guide you through that. I've never played a minion build in this game before, except for 2 days ago when I decided to start a new Witch to test some things out for this build. But once we get to Act 4, we get to do the thorny stuff, the good stuff, the things that we like. I'm not sure with the new progression whether we're going to get access to tier 3 support gems and unique items, or our 3rd ascendancy first. If we get access to the tier 3 support gems and the unique items first, then in Act 4 we want to switch to a physical Thorns build. We will be using a spear, we'll be using rapid assault, we'll be using quill burst, and we'll be using barbs, and we'll just be slapping enemies with our Thorns damage until we get to our 3rd ascendancy. Once we get to our 3rd ascendancy, that is when we can start reserving life, that is when we can use mind over matter, and that is when we can switch to using shield charge and crackling barrier without sacrificing too much damage. So if we get to our 3rd ascendancy before we get to the Thorns transition, then we can go straight from ascending into Thorns. If that is the case, however, hold off on your ascension until you have a crown of the Pale King. If you are not mana stacking after your 3rd ascendancy, you are just reserving half of your health pool for nothing. Now, I have said the word ascendancy a lot at this point, but I haven't told you what order to get your ascendancies in. The first thing that we'll be picking up is Altered Flesh. This does mean that in our leveling we will have to prioritize fire resistance and chaos resistance over cold and lightning resistance. Obviously in the campaign it's very difficult to get to 75% all res early, so these are our priorities after our 1st ascendancy. For our 2nd ascendancy, it will still be a little bit too early to be igniting ourselves or to be reserving our health. So instead we're just going to take the 2 small ascendancy nodes that give us 3% increased life. This will just let us be a little bit tankier as we mow our way through what remains of the acts as we get to our 3rd ascendancy, at which point this is where we'll start reserving life for mana and energy shield. But it is very important that before you reserve the life, you get mind over matter. Otherwise you are just losing health pool, and we don't want to do that for no reason. It's also important that before your 3rd ascendancy, your shield charge can fit 3 support gems in. We need crackling barrier for our damage, we need quill burst for our damage, but most importantly we need life tap so that we can still use it if we ever run out of mana. We ideally won't ever run out of mana because mana is basically our life, but life tap will just make things a little bit more comfortable and will actually give us a use for our life regen, which at this point we won't be using a whole lot because we're not really going to be taking damage into our life if we are doing things right. After we've got our 3rd ascendancy, after we have quill burst, crackling barrier, life tap, and shield charge, and all of our stuff going, we can zoom through the acts and get to our 4th ascendancy. 4th ascendancy is where we start liking our crit multiplier, and we can take grinning immolation. You just have to make sure that before you take grinning immolation, you have a dowsing charm, because if you don't, you will kill yourself. 15% of life and energy shield per second is a lot of damage. Do not kill yourself, get a dowsing charm before your 4th ascendancy. From there, from finishing your 4th ascendancy and through the rest of the campaign, through the early endgame, you can just focus on slowly accumulating more life, more energy shield, more resistances, more strength, more int, more mana, all of these stats that will just generally make us stronger, and you can start working on your uniques. I hope that by the time you get to the endgame, you'll have both Crown of the Pale King and Briar Patch. I'd say our next priority unique is the Window to Paradise, but decent revs are a lot more important then Window to Paradise. From there, you can also buy Bearer's Anguish, but again, decent rares are a lot more important than Bearer's Anguish. If Bearer's Anguish turns out to cost 2 divines, I hope that every other piece of rare gear you have equipped at that point costs either 2 divines or was the best thing on the market. Because Bearer's Anguish is not going to add that much to our build. Now, if everything works out according to plan, this build should be strong enough to get you through all of your early progression, to get all your Atlas points, to get your first few boss kills, and by the point you get to there, I'll probably have made some kind of a build guide onto something we can transition into, or some way that we can push this build a lot further than it is. But it's also important to remember that everything that I've outlined in this video is subject to change. We don't know what the passive tree is going to look like when the patch comes out. We only have leaks for what skill gems are going to look like when the patch comes out, so let's keep an eye open. This is a build concept video, not a build guide video, and you cannot follow this to a T. Keep an eye out on my channel. If I decide to league start this, and this is looking like my most likely league start, then I will have put out another video that is a bit more fleshed out once we get the accurate patch notes, the support gem information, and the passive skill tree. You can also check the description. I'll try and keep the most up-to-date path of building link in there, and also if you join my Discord, I have a build guide section in that will also always have the most up-to-date path of building that exists for this build, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you like what I've got going with this build. I hope I haven't fucked up this guide too much. Please drop a like if you thought it was a good build guide, dislike if you think I fucking suck, and subscribe for more Thorns build guides and other things that I decide that I want to cover